It's less cute because
Leslie
we
is thinking.
just.
Oh, we are live.
Right, perfect.
Wonderful.
Yay!
Awesome. Welcome everyone to our Ask CDI event. We're excited to be joining you through Facebook Live this evening. So my name is Masima. I'm a child and family clinician with the Integra Learning Disabilities and Mental Health stream, and I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves.
I'm Amanda Daniel, also a child and family clinician here at LDMH.
And I'm Helen Hargreaves, another family and clinician here.
Awesome. And you might see another name here, Baden. She is our tech support and helping us to moderate your questions and comments as we go along. So as mentioned, we're speaking to you from the Learning Disabilities and Mental Health stream here at the Child Development Institute, where we support children and youth ages 8 to 18 and their families who have a learning disability and a co-occurring mental health challenge. And in our program, we offer therapeutic interventions through an LDMH lens. And we also offer workshops such as these ones to anyone wanting to understand more about learning disabilities and mental health. And since you might be joining us from all across the world, we do want to clarify on how we're defining learning disabilities, because we know it can vary across continents and even within countries sometimes. And for example, we know in the UK, the term dyslexia is used to encompass all learning disabilities, while the term learning disability in the UK refers to what we call here in Ontario as developmental delays. So we are speaking about learning disabilities specifically within the context of Ontario. And so tonight we'll be speaking about feelings and anxieties that can come up when thinking about reentry back to school, particularly for September 2021, in a world that's adjusting and readjusting to coming out of lockdown. And before we delve into our content, we would like to remind you, our audience, that this is a live and public discussion. And so for your online safety, if you are participating in the conversation in the comments, please avoid sharing personal information about yourselves, others, particularly kids. So at the beginning of any workshop, we feel it's important to start with a land acknowledgement and express our gratitude for being able to work on this land that we call now Toronto. As social workers, the three of us, we do wish to recognize the problematic history our profession has had in contributing to the genocide and systemic oppression of Indigenous peoples. We are honored to have the opportunity to work towards reconciliation, and we recognize that reconciliation is an ongoing individual and collective process. The land on which CDI operates is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat. Our community is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples, and we recognize the enduring presence of Indigenous peoples on this land. And we invite you to check out this website that outlines a map to learn more about the land that you live on, as you might be joining us from all around the world. And the screen cap you see on your screen here above shows the area of Toronto, which depicts how diverse the Indigenous nations, lands, and territories are, as you can see. And if you're just tuning in now, we are speaking to you from Integra. My name is Masima, and myself and my colleagues Helen and Amanda will walk you through supporting emotions regarding going back to school and reentry after a lockdown. So here are some questions we received when inquiring about concerns you might have regarding reentry back to school, not only back to school, but also in general public spaces like extracurricular activities and all that kind of stuff. And we've structured this presentation by addressing each of these questions you see on the screen. And we will first speak about how to work and address with your child when they have big emotions, what those emotions can look like, and why they might be coming up now, and to go through some strategies on how you can support your child and yourselves during this process. And of course, if you have any questions or comments, please type them in the chat and we'll answer them throughout the presentation and hopefully leave some time towards the end as well to answer them. So let's take a look at our first question. How can we cultivate more hope and positivity about the future with conflicting information on how and when the pandemic will end? It's such a great question and on so many people's minds, I'm sure. We want our kids to be hopeful, and we don't want to skip any steps in getting there or ignore the difficult realities of the pandemic. In order to help kids feel hopeful, we have to help them work through their other feelings that might be getting in their way. And this can be especially hard if all the other feelings are emotions we'd rather not feel, like anger, sadness, grief, shame, or fear. So what do? How do we address and work through these hard to feel emotions? So let's turn to a little bit of neuroscience to help us understand what is going on when thinking about emotions. We know when we're faced with a challenging situation, we have an emotional response. If we feel nervous about making new friends and we go and we try and the interaction doesn't go the way we wanted, we might feel rejected and shut out. And in that moment, imagine trying to think logically. Or in another situation that's emotionally activating for you. It's hard, and there's a reason for this. And we know that when our emotions are high, our logic brain goes offline and is compromised in that moment. You see an image here of the brain. We can think of the brain as being divided kind of into the emotion brain and the logic brain. And we know that we have to soothe the emotion brain before getting access to our logic brain. And so a quick hand model of the brain makes this concept more digestible, created by Dr. Dan Siegel. So I'm going to actually walk through this together. And if you can also hold up your hand to help it work through your memory. So let's look more closely what's happening. If we start with our hand, the arm is the spinal cord that's running up our back. If we were to curl our thumb into our palm, this area is our limbic system. It's the limbic part of our brain, which is involved in generating emotions. Now, our thumb represents our amygdala, which is like our brain's smoke detector. It sends signals anytime we start to perceive any sort of threat, and it activates our fight, flight, and freeze and flop reactions, which Amanda will be talking about more later. Now, if you're to wrap your fingers over your thumb here, our fingers here represent our frontal lobe, our prefrontal cortex, being our fingertips here. And that's responsible for decision-making, executive functioning skills, higher order thinking. So this is our brain when we're calm. We can see that our prefrontal cortex is attached to our limbic system, and we're able to use our whole brain. However, when emotions rise, our amygdala starts to buzz and get activated, and our prefrontal cortex goes offline, and we do something called flip our lid. And it prevents, as you can see, from accessing that logic brain and executive functioning skills. And we know that when kids are still developing, the connection between their frontal lobe and their limbic system, and it continues to develop well into adulthood. So with that in mind, we want to understand that we can't access those higher order thinking skills when our lids are flipped. And so our focus needs to be first on how can we de-escalate our kids so that they can have access to their frontal lobe again. This is also a great tool you can show your own young ones, and it helps them resonate and learn more about their emotional experience. So how do we soothe that emotion brain? Here is our framework, and you can kind of think of it as emotional first aid, if you will. So the first step is to validate. That's what gives us back our frontal lobe, puts the lid back on. It helps you join your child by helping them feel understood, heard, and seen. When we validate, we're soothing that emotion brain, and it helps the brain to become a bit more flexible and open so that it can effectively receive the support. After we validate, if needed, we can offer support, emotional support, or practical support. And we'll get into what these two look at later. So let's do a very quick experiential exercise. Imagine your child or the person you had in mind when attending this webinar comes to you with big feelings, whether they're verbally telling you or showing you that something is going wrong and they're having a big feeling. And they might say, nobody hung out with me at school today. And you're choosing to validate. You might say something like, sounds like you had a hard day, or I know it can feel hopeless right now. What's a 3-letter word you are tempted to say next? Sounds like you had a hard day, so just think to yourself. And if you're like me, always wanting to look on the bright side, you might be tempted to say, but it's going to be okay. Your neighbors love to hang out with you, or but don't worry, it's just the first day and it'll get better. Or but you should be more approachable next time. And so there is a place for problem solving or reassurance or limit setting. And what we encourage you to do is to validate first, and that means to move from but to because. So no wonder you feel but is transformed into no wonder you feel because. So no wonder you feel sad today because nobody sat with you at lunch, and because making and keeping friends has been really tough this year, and because you've reached out to a few people and gotten no responses, and because friendships are super important to you, and you feel like you don't have your people with you right now. It makes sense you're feeling hurt by this. And we say 3 to 5 because statements because we want you to have the opportunity to find the because statements that ring most true for your child that you see in front of you. So coming back to our kids with LDs. So we know that they often exist in chronically invalidating environments like school, which can also feed into mental health issues, right? And if we can show them that we get it and we are willing to tolerate those big emotions, that helps to build trust. And that's huge. And of course, kids are going to have big reactions, and sometimes we might not agree with how they feel, or we just want to focus on the truth. But we want to say that with this, you're helping to focus on their emotional truth rather than getting stuck with the literal truth. And as you can see, the script is quite simple. And a phrase we often use to refer to validation is we say it's simple and it's not easy. And our script here starts with the words no wonder. However, if you feel like that's not genuine to you, you can say things like, I understand, or it makes sense, or I can only imagine as sentence starters. So let's look at why these because statements are so powerful. So when the external environment mirrors the internal experience, the alarm bells in the brain are reduced in intensity, if you remember the hand model. So with every because statement that we make, you're soothing the nervous system and you're able to sort of enter their internal experience or their castle in this analogy. And if we jump to problem solving or reassurance right away, we're sort of met with that closed drawbridge or that lid flipped. And even if you're getting these because statements wrong, initially, that's okay. The fact that you're showing interest into their emotional experience and showing that you're willing to sit with those big feelings is validating in and of itself. And your child will correct you, as you've already shown that you're committed to understanding what's going on for them. So once we've entered their castle, once we've validated and helped them regulate, then we can offer emotional and practical support if needed. And this step might not always be necessary, as often validation is enough. If you really show that you get it, that you've joined with them and see the issue from their perspective, that can be enough. And with that, they can problem solve or take the direction you're giving them. However, if more support is needed after you validate, then we want to meet their need by offering support. And so let's look at what emotional support specifically can look like. We know that every emotion has a need. And here we've used these 3 emotions as our example. And as you read through them, notice which one you see more in your child. And the point here is to recognize, what the emotion is in the first place and know which emotion have which needs. And the more information you have about the specific emotions you're dealing with, both for yourselves and for your kids, the better you can address it and the less likely you are to avoid them. So if we're going to just take anger, for example, we know that anger often needs to be heard. It needs time and space. And anger needs the ability to assert itself and communicate what it is it needs, and to set and defend your boundaries and seek space rather than bottle it up. So with all those examples in mind and with the foundation of validation you have, let's look at another example. Let's say your child comes up to you and says, it sucks, I never got to perform at my grade 7 talent show. And you can say, yeah, I hear you. It sucks because you were looking forward to performing all of last year, and because you practice your choreography every day, and because you've moved to a different school and you don't have the opportunity to perform in front of your friends that you care about so much. No wonder you're feeling sad. In this situation, again, validation is just acknowledging and witnessing their feelings in a non-judgmental way. And like in this example, that can be enough a lot of the time. Looking at another example, let's say your child comes to you in a panic and says, what if they run out of masks at school and I drop mine on the floor and I can't wear it anymore and I need a new one, but they're all out? So in spirit of validation, you say, I can see why you would be scared about that, because we do drop our mask on the floor. It happens and we need a new one. And because you know how important it is to keep your mask on and have it clean. And because you don't want to miss out on any more school because you're so eager to be back after a year of being away. And that last bubble here is an example of how you might move from validation to addressing the issue and offering support. You're feeling because, and do you think there's another way we can prevent that you can help prevent that? Or I think I can find the way. Maybe you can have extra masks in your backpack, for example. So all those examples of validation works wonderfully if language and language processing comes easily for your child, because it's quite wordy, right? However, we can absolutely also validate by using little words, or even if your child is not super verbal. So we're going to show you a video that Helen and Amanda beautifully did where they're going to explore that. So what the first one is, what happens when your child maybe is not saying too much? And the second example is when they're saying a lot of things, but maybe you're not understanding what they're saying. So let's take a look.
Ugh, I just don't want to.
Oh, yeah, because you don't want to.
Ugh, it's not. Ugh.
Oh, sucks.
I just. And I mean, the homework's always. I don't.
Yeah, because the homework is always so tough.
Like when someone like does a thing, and then you kind of, like, and then your brain and then other people come in, and like it's all really, because of the stuff.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Because like I got a group chat, and then like somebody else joins, and like I don't really know what to do.
Yeah, like it's hard to know how to respond when someone new enters.
They're not they're not new, but like now there's like all this talking, and like
Mhm. Like there's so much going on, it's hard to keep track of or to know how to join.
yeah.
Ah, yeah, that's so confusing.
Right.
Totally.
So as you can see with that example, is validation doesn't just look like one thing. It's not just using because statements and that's it. We saw Amanda use her body language, her tone to convey empathy and understanding. She kept nodding. She used, again, those nonverbals to say, hey, I'm right here with you. She gave some guesses, repeated Helen's words. And when she got it wrong, she didn't give in to her frustration. She gave Helen the time she needed to express and explore what might she be feeling. And we know that for Amanda, correcting her guess was easier than just leaving Helen to figure out those words on her own.
Okay. So this question comes as, so for only children who've been isolated a lot, how do they relearn being with others, sharing, working in groups? And then somebody came in and said, great question, not for only for onlys. The return to the park for my youngest at 10 makes me realize how much negotiation skills he's lost or not developed. And I think there's like a direct question here that's about how do we support our kids with social, which is that we get them with other kids and kids that they like. That's sort of, and then we cross our fingers, right? Um, and and support them when things go, be there to give support as they need it. But I think there's a bigger question here, that I think is the much harder question, which is that feeling of, the kids finally going back to the park and then realizing how much has been lost this year, right? And I'm hearing about a lot of that feeling of like reentry and like, oh, like we finally get to go back. We finally get to go back to the park, and it's not, not only for this kiddo is he not acting like a 10-year-old, but he's not quite acting how he was at 8.5 when he stopped being able to go to the park, right? And I think that those are producing a lot of feelings, and Amanda's going to talk about the feelings about fear. But first, we wanted to make sure we're spending enough time on loss, right? Our kids have lost a lot. Our kids, it's been a year and a half since things, since that, March day where it's sort of, you could almost hear the like steel doors shutting all around the world. Um, right? Our kids have lost milestones. These might be big ones like graduating from middle school, elementary, or high school, or they might be smaller milestones like, the first time the grade nines go to the dance, this thing happens. Or I was really excited to, you know, Mr. Smith only teaches grade 10 French, and I was excited to be in his class. In grade 5, I was going to be with the teacher that has a reptile collection at the back of his room. And, but we weren't allowed to have the reptiles. I wasn't in in-person school, whatever, right? All of these things, right? Kids have missed skills, right? Our kids have missed time at school playing, they've missed informal things, they've also missed classes, right? There's lots of kids who, were training in sports or just, intensely or just recreationally. Um, Maybe swimming classes or drama classes, right? They miss the community that comes from clubs. Lots of us have missed, been hearing a lot of people talk about missing their sort of B-level friends. Not the people that their phone number and have on social media and reach out and chat, like those managing to keep those, but the people that you just kind of ran into at swimming lessons or at Girl Guides and really enjoyed and then didn't think much about, right? Our kids have lost connections with friends who aren't in their cohort, right? Maybe they, in fact, weren't allowed to hang out with them. Maybe some of their favorite people were in virtual while they were in person, or vice versa. And opportunities that are tied to certain grades, right? There's so much, it's good, so much to be missing. And so, what we have a word for the process of getting used to loss, and that's grief, right? That's all grief is that we're getting used to loss, something big that our brain can't process all at once. And as that sort of grinding gears process of adjusting to this change, often a change we don't want, that we didn't ask for, um, it's really common to go through a whole lot of different emotions, right? And you might have heard of this as the 5 stages of grief. And sometimes people expect that to be linear. I feel like those are only people who haven't gone through grief, and which is very happy for them that that's been their experience. Certainly for my experiences of grief, it's really messy, right? And that often it's things that we can identify. You know, I think I'm hearing from some clinicians even of like, oh, well, I don't know what my kids are dealing with because they're like angry sometimes and lethargic sometimes and anxious other times. And sometimes they're really trying to make, deals, and sometimes they just give up and sometimes they're fine, but how do I treat all those different things? And in my head, I'm like, oh, that's actually one thing. It's grief. It just looks so differently. Right. So I think this is a thing I found to be really useful when I'm aware of these different symptoms of anger, depression, bargaining, acceptance, denial, and isolation. I can spot that and say, oh, this is somebody who's getting used to a change they didn't want to have to deal with ever. Right. So, but this is like why this is about re-entry. Surely all the grief feelings happened when they got, when they weren't allowed to sign up for swimming lessons. Why are you talking about it when they can finally go back to swimming lessons? You may be asking. Um, and the answer is that often we don't notice the grief until we feel it's missing, right? We think about this a lot with like the loss of loved ones. I know one of the biggest cries I had when my grandfather died was when, about a year after his death, I was walking through a post office and saw a stamp he would find cool and just really quickly was like, oh, I should tell granddad. And right, the weight of it hit me, right? Right. And maybe some of it is they didn't even know it was going to be that bad till they were back, right? They didn't notice they'd lost their swimming skills until they were back in the pool. They didn't notice that they were disconnected from their friends at school, they didn't know that that friendship had melted away until they reconnected and discovered that, last time we hung out, we were 10 and now we're 12 and really different. And I don't know how to get back in sync again. Right? Because sometimes there are things they come back, but they didn't pause. It changed, especially for our kids, right? I figured it was very rough math. I may well be wrong. Um, but we figured like the equivalent of a year and a half for my 9-year-old. We figured that that's 1/6 of her life. So, so if you're 36, that would be the equivalent of oh no, I've lost the math. Um, anyways, 36, 3, 12. Anyway, that would be the equivalent of 6 years, right? Like it's a huge amount of time for our kids that they've been away from their friends. We're huge developmental stages. I know my kiddo was keeping toys that she'd well outgrown because she's like, no, I need this to have a play date. And we sort of had to be like, but you're not going to have play dates with, with 7-year-olds. That's not who's going to come over. So you don't need 7-year-old toys. And even if your kids are 16 or 18, that's still like in all that ages, that year and a half matters, right? So, and Amanda has a story that illustrates this sort of how grief can like really come up and what you need as a teen from your parents so brilliantly. I wanted to hand this portion over to her.
Thanks, Helen. Yeah, when we were talking about this idea of why now, right? Why are all the emotions coming up now? A story from my high school days came to mind. I moved across the country to Ontario in the middle of 10th grade. And for the first 3 months or so, when I was in my new home and at my new school, I just kind of kept my head down and was focusing on trying to meet new people and get into new things. And then at the 3 month mark, it was March break. And I had a break from school and I got to travel back out west and see all of my friends. And when my friend embraced me in a hug, I just burst into tears and broke down and let go of all of these emotions I didn't even know that I was holding on to, because I was reminded of what it felt like to be held by someone that really knew me. And so we thought, yeah, a similar concept might be true for our kids. And I remember at the time, my parents were confused and, understandably kind of worried about this reemergence of my emotions. And their response kind of made me confused too, and kind of feel like, am I crazy for feeling so emotional all of a sudden? Like, what's going on? I think what I yearned for in that moment was to be told, like, no, that's normal and that's okay. Right. And that doesn't erase the 3 months of hard work you've put in trying to form a new life here. It's just you processing it. So that would have been great to hear. Yeah.
And so, let's break that down a bit further. So one of the rules for validation is that you deal with what they're giving you, right? You might sometimes be like, you're angry, but I think that anger is covering up embarrassment. Cutting straight to the embarrassment makes you no one's friend, especially not a teenager's. Hot tip. So as they're going through grief, right, you can't say, oh, this is really about loss. You have to meet what they're giving you. So if they're giving you anger, right, I can't believe that they're not letting me, go back and take a sophomore role at the musical because I'm in grade 12 now, right? They're giving you anger. This is unfair, right? Like we talked about, anger needs validation. It needs time, space, and clarity about rules. So sometimes that's your right, that's your rule, and you should be allowed to follow it. And sometimes that's clarity that, yeah, it really sucks you missed that moment that only happens for grade 10s, but you're not in grade 10 now. And they're not, and that's the rule and they can't go back for certain reasons, right? Depression, sense of listlessness, I don't care, I'm giving up, right? And validate hopelessness, right? It's a lot of often what's at the core of a just sort of low energy, yeah, and hopelessness more than sadness often. So it needs validation. It makes sense. It's hard to imagine things. It's hard to get excited about the future because when we get excited, things keep changing. And then they're not excited, or the thing you were excited for, it wasn't good, or you couldn't do it. It's scary to get excited. Comfort, right? That, and then might be physical comfort, like here's a cup of tea or a hug or a blanket. Um, Connection. So sometimes just being there, being around, not having a lot of words, not having a lot of demands, and hope, right? And that's, I think, a really hard one for us to give um, to give kids right now because there's so much uncertainty. And so what I try to look for when I'm giving hope is to really ask myself what makes me hold on to hope can be a really good thing. And sometimes I'll often say, I trust that things are going to change, right? I don't know how they're going to change. Maybe they're going to get better. Maybe they're going to get worse. They're not going to be like this forever. This will change because I know at least that's true. Or I might have real reasons to hope, right? Like, yeah, I know that it feels really rough that you didn't get to say goodbye to all your friends at the grade 8 graduation. And, I know they've been texting you and that they're so excited to see you on, when you get back in person in grade 9. Bargaining. So that's the sort of like, oh, but maybe if I do this, then we can change the rules. We could go, we could still go to Florida if I, get vaccinated and do these things and I'm going to wash my hands 50 times a day and then it'll be okay. Right? So that often needs some validation. Oh, you really want to go. You really want to have that Florida trip. And reality testing, right? No matter how many times you wash your hands, we can't make it safe, right? And that can feel really hard to do. It can feel really yucky because you've got a kid who's trying to get to hope, but through the wrong path, right? And sometimes what's compassionate is saying, no, not there, right? That's not where the hope lives. Um, Acceptance, validation, and support, right? Amanda might have said, after that big cry, might have said, I'm just miss these people so much. At which point she probably just needed a parent to be like, yeah, they were so important. They were a big deal. This move was hard. And you can imagine how hard it would be for her parents. Like, oh, I feel for them, right? Like, how would you get those words out your face without tripping over all the guilt for having made the move? And ultimately, and that's the ask of being a parent, right? Is that we have to sometimes put our needs aside and figure out what our kiddos need. And it's never easy, but it's often magical and worthwhile. And denial, right? This just isn't happening. No, it's going to be fine. I don't need to worry about bringing it. No, mom, I don't need to worry about bringing an extra mask because I don't think they're even going to make me wear masks. I think they're probably not going to follow those rules, right? Just been like, yeah, and maybe, I don't know either, but I'm pretty sure they will. So we got to have those masks. I'm pretty sure that's going to happen. Okay. Um, so another thing to support is to let them know this is a process, right? Amanda was saying she felt like she was wrong or crazy, or is this going to go on forever, or this is all over the place. One of the stories I find useful for kids is the idea that grief comes in waves, right? And sometimes those waves are really big and they pull you under and it feels like you're drowning. And often over time, the waves get smaller. And sometimes storms come and the waves get big again and we can't predict it. But that also, as we get used to these griefs, we get better at swimming through it, right? As we talk about it. Which brings us to the idea that the only way out is through, and emotions are like tunnels. Sometimes I'll use another metaphor with kids that grief, for all emotions, but grief especially, it's like we have an emotional credit card that we can put it on. We can say, I can't deal with this right now, charge it, right? But just like with our real credit cards, it comes with emotional interest. And if we leave it on that card, the interests have built up, and now that $50 lamp actually costs $300. And I think a lot of us this fall are looking at having to pay down some balances on some of our emotional credit cards as we're resurfacing and realizing that, that, oh, wait till we get vaccinated, wait till stage 3 was a bit of a bait and switch, and it's not quite the freedom, at least I know. So some of us, me personally, am feeling lots of those feelings about what I thought the summer was going to be versus what I'm getting, what I thought returning to school was going to be versus what I'm getting. And the only way out is through. You got to get through. They can feel, especially if you're not good at going through, they can feel like they're a cave. Sometimes they get tighter and darker. Sometimes the feelings get bigger and bigger and bigger. You can imagine if Amanda was crying and her mom started being like, yeah, this is hard. You do miss them. Susie's known you your whole life. I feel like I'm going to make Amanda cry just as I say these things right now, like 20 years later. Right? It might have gotten bigger and more feelings, and that's part of going through the tunnel, right? Um, yeah. So Amanda, now that I've got you all clamped, I'm gonna pass it over to you.
And it's so funny, we planned this example and talked about it, and even though you were validating me as an example to the audience, it felt so nice to hear so many years later, which just, yeah, reminds me what a powerful tool it really is. So another question on parents' minds that we got was, how do we make the gear shift from a year and a half of, COVID lockdowns on and off to now suddenly sharing indoor spaces with many kids, right? Some kids and adults say that this doesn't really feel safe. So how do we push those boundaries around safety in a supportive way? So this is such a complex and important question, because the things that used to be safe became dangerous, right? Over the past year and a half. We learned to adaptively fear and worry about things that were once totally safe, right? Embracing people, sharing air, touching our surroundings. We learned to view these things as threats to our safety. And now we have to unlearn that fear. And for some of us, kids and adults, that may happen really quickly. And for others, it's going to take some time and some intentional reprogramming. So in order to reprogram, we'll need to lean on those validation schools for sure that Massima walked us through, right? To show that we get why this is so hard and that their feelings make sense as those waves come and go. And in supporting your child and teen's mental health, whether it's reentering to their school environment or activities, using transit, going to the mall, whatever it is, for some of them, just having the accurate information might be enough, right? Shifting their understanding. So it's safe to go to grandma's house now because she's fully vaccinated. Or, our leading scientists have figured out that it's less about touch, so we don't have to wipe down our groceries every time. Right? Sometimes some validation and then the correct information will be enough. Others may need a bit of support the first time, right? And then quickly get used to it. So if they're going back to karate for the first time, maybe I'll wait in the waiting room if you need to take a break or you need to go home early. Or if it's a teen, I'm going to drop you at the mall. You call me if it's overwhelming and I'll come pick you up right away. I'm just hanging out at the plaza across the road, right? So just that kind of easing into it. And some will need a significantly slower, steadier approach. And that is okay too. So if you're noticing some nervous system responses, that fight, flight, freeze, flop that Massima mentioned earlier, it might be a clue that your child would need this more scaled, slow approach. And you may be familiar with these, but I'm going to go through them. And as I do, notice which ones are your go-tos, which ones sound like you, and which ones do you notice in your child. So our fight response. So that is when our nervous system responds by attacking the threat. So this often looks like aggression, yelling, arguing, getting into a power struggle, like those two bunnies there. Then we have our flight response. So this is our avoidance system. We distract, run away, refuse to take risks, daydream, and mentally tune out, right? Finding any way to escape the threat. We also have the freeze response. So that's when our nervous system responds with inaction. We're frozen in place, tense, unable to move or think clearly. And then the flop. That one might be newer to people. The flop is more of a collapse. Our nervous system is just overwhelmed, so all we can do is flop ourselves down. And while the bunnies illustrate those different responses well, we want to talk about what that often looks like for our kids. Right? So the fight response might be fighting with you, right? Refusal to do the things that you're asking them to do. Flight might often, right now, we hear from parents, look like escaping to video games, right? That space where they feel safe and feel competent. Freeze, the example there, freezing up on a test, right? Where your mind goes completely blank, or freezing in a social situation, I don't remember what to do. Or flop. And that often looks like just collapsing on the couch, right? Or collapsing on their bed. So feel free to let us know in the chat which one you see most frequently with your kid. Or during COVID, this might look like fleeing public spaces when they become overcrowded. Maybe that's the flight response. Or refusing to take transit because the risk feels too high. Maybe they get into a fight response with you around that. Or now it might look like flopping on the couch when it's time for a play date or a hangout, because being indoors with someone unmasked and having to remember how to keep a conversation going and what that friend was interested in because it's been so long since you've seen them, all of those things may just be too much. And so they flop down. So these responses have developed and are strong because, at least at one point, they kept us safe, right? They made that scary thing go away, or allowed us to escape it and all the uncomfortable feelings that went along with it. So this has been naturally reinforced, and therefore it's a really fast unconscious response. Now we're learning that some of these threats have gone away, right? But even when we cognitively know that, it can still be a slow process for our emotion brain to catch up, right? We have to move slowly so that that fight, flight, freeze, whatever response is small enough that our kids can re-regulate and make a calm choice, right? And bring that lid back online so that they can have those neural connections and use their full brain. So if you're seeing those responses and you're noticing patterns of that behavior, try to interpret it as a clue that they may need us to go slow and stay grounded. We liked this visual of a chipmunk, right? In order for them to feel safe enough for us to approach and to eat out of our hands, we can't make sudden moves. It's got to be a slow transition. And one of the most effective ways to move slow is through what we call tiered or scaled exposure, meaning you expose yourself to the scary or threatening thing in small, gradual steps. So the example on the slide here is for the goal of making a new friend or challenging some social anxiety. The first step is to say hi to a classmate, and they rated that a 4 in their fear rating. The next step is a 5, where they're tasked with making a comment to a classmate, like, have a good weekend. Right? Next, asking a classmate a question, and so on, right? So really small steps, and each one takes more bravery than the last, but they're building a sense of competence as they go, or a sense of mastery. We might also refer to this as a bravery table or a fear ladder, where we're climbing the rungs. When possible, this tool is going to be more effective when the child's bought into the process. Right? So if it's a goal that they genuinely have, that they want to work towards, we're going to have more traction. But of course, we know that's not always possible. Sometimes this has to be crafted by the parent and gone about, in subtle supportive ways. So this example was pulled from anxietycanada.com, where they have a bunch of examples of what tiered exposure can look like and different visuals that you could use if you're able to do this in collaboration with your child. They also have some great videos that you could watch with your kid that are really accessible and really normalize experiencing anxiety. So if this resonates with you, I encourage you to check that out.
Okay, so this is our last question. So if you have questions or comments, please add those to the chat. And after this question, we're going to have some time to do a Q&A and take on some of those ones. So this final question I thought was just to the crux of it is, how do I make peace with the different choices, beliefs, and risk tolerances of other families? Right? How do I be okay with all of it? Right? And that's one aspect of it, but so much of it, how do I be okay with it? How do I be okay with going back to school when I know that that's imperfect? How do I be okay with staying virtual when I know that that is imperfect as well? Um, so you are probably also coping with worries about what's safe, um, feelings that needs to change, like that either you need to take things that used to be safe and remind yourself not to do them, or that things you've learned not to do to relearn them. You're probably also dealing with some really complicated feelings of loss. I bet you have your own things to grieve, right? And that, and many of us, right? It's also not just been a lockdown, it's been a pandemic, right? Many of us have lost people, or have, lost our own health, or have people we care about who are less healthy now than they were at the beginning of this. There's real stuff for you to process, right? You also need and deserve validation and emotional support, right? One of the sayings I think about, right, is that you can't pour from an empty cup, right? And your kids need you, right? There's no one better placed to support your child than you, even if you have the world's most surly teen, right? I have yet to work with a teen who, under all the layers, and like I've worked with hard teens, that isn't craving connection with their parents, right? They might not tell you, they might make me swear to, that I will never tell you this directly if I'm working with them. But every one of them on some level, is like, if she could just listen, if I knew that he would do this without getting mad at me, if I knew that you know, they would listen without giving an idea or telling a story about, right? They just want you. And you can't pour from an empty cup, right? So our final thought, for you is we really want you to think about, and we'd love it if you wanted to share these as well in the chat with each other. What works for you? How do you refill your cup, especially when so many of the things, one of my tiny experiences of grief, I went back to the office, um, where I've worked for like over 10 years. And I had to take the public transit, and which is like, it's definitely tiered exposure. And one of the things I know is if you're really reluctant about a tiered exposure, a reward can make that go a lot faster. So I had this plan that I was going to go to Starbucks, and I get to the corner, and the Starbucks that's been there, since I was an MSW student is gone. I know, sorry, Amanda. I hate this to be the way you find out. But it's gone, it's closed down. And I was just like, oh, what do I do now? Right? So we've all got our stuff to process. Most of it's bigger than a closed Starbucks, but sometimes the closed Starbucks can hit the hardest. And the things that we did, right? Like giving ourselves small rewards, small benefits, can get derailed by the pandemic. So some things, going for walks, taking some time, listening to music, journaling. Therapy is great. We are obviously big believers in it. Talking to friends. I know lots of people get a lot of support from internet support groups, especially if you've got unique or neurodivergent kids. Finding other parents that get the wonderful uniqueness of your kid can be incredibly helpful. And cultural or spiritual practices. So that might be, stuff you do alone, like prayer or meditation, or stuff you do in community, like sweat lodges or powwows, or all sorts of ways, right? So to think about what fills you up, because your kid needs you, right? And that's beautiful and terrible all at once, right? So on that note, I see Baden send us some questions. So I'm going to read them out, and Amanda and Massima, you guys jump in. So one is a comment, so it's a story. So we're going back to school shopping, and the kid says, "I don't think it's a good idea, Mom." And I asked her why, and she said, "What's the point? Because I'll outgrow it, because new school might still be forced to lock down." Right? And I see that as a real, a real illustration of this sort of complicated loss, right? And that even things like back to school shopping might need, like, yeah, it might happen. That's scary. That's sad, right? And maybe it's too much. Maybe the kid's like, I don't want to get excited because it's going to be too hard if it gets pulled away. And you say, cool, you've got awesome clothes and a fantastic fashion sense. And let's work with what you've got, and we'll save that money till we know for sure. Or maybe you push it a bit and say, okay, but let's make sure you've got one outfit that you feel really good about? Because I think school's going to open up. Or maybe you push it more and say, none of your pants fit. If you have to actually be somewhere where people see your legs, we're going to have a trouble. So we really need to go shopping, right? It all depends on your situation. Okay, so we've got some questions. I'm an elementary teacher and anticipate that some of my students will be more anxious than others will be. Absolutely. How should I speak to the class in large about participating in activities, a large group, in a way that inspires group confidence, but is sensitive to those children who are most fearful and nervous? Oh, I love the compassion in that question and just the awareness of like, good, we need to do this because it's what 18 out of 20 need, but also I don't want to break those other two. It really speaks to the tension I think teachers often have of how do I meet all these needs all at once of all these beautiful, wonderful little people. Amanda or
Mhm.
Massima, do you have thoughts about how to hit that balance?
I have an initial thought and then please jump in, but I'm just thinking of um, if there's a way to kind of do those three things we talked about, right? Like giving the information, supporting the first time, and also creating kind of a scaled approach, right? If you can kind of communicate to the whole group that this is a safe thing and here are the ways that we're making it safe, and kind of offering maybe more support than typical, and then also doing in a way where kids can join in when they're ready or can go to this space for a break or can come tell you this, code word or this message if they need some space or to go to the washroom, take a break, whatever it is. Um, yeah, like kind of encouraging the group,
Mm,
but giving moments for them to scale it themselves when needed.
totally. That reminds me of our philosophy at TOEI, which is like challenge by choice. It's philosophy at many camps. Many camps have that as the philosophy either for the high ropes or the climbing wall, but we use it through every single activity at TOEI. Um, and what's amazing about it, right, is that when we switched to that, people were really worried about like, oh, but if we let them choose to challenge themselves, what if they don't and they don't do anything? And the thing is that giving that power and control, that's not what happened. What happened was that anxious kids got braver and did more things, right? So I often have a voice that tells me to like push the kids and don't trust the process, but I often have to take deep breaths and like Amanda was saying, just they gave lovely practical examples of just giving space, right, to let that unfold. I'm sorry, Missy, I interrupted you.
No, yeah, that was wonderful. I don't have much to add really. This idea, even by naming some emotions or difficulties that might be there, by even just creating that space, as you both have said, that offers that space to challenge themselves and uh, to build emotional tolerance just by creating that space for it. And by virtue of just asking a question like this, I'm sure that that's happening already. But yeah.
There's another beautiful question here. I love all the caring professionals and parents. My major concern is that as a kindergarten teacher, we preach sharing is caring. Now the message is keep 2 meters apart. When this whole pandemic is over, how do we integrate little minds together like 3 years ago? Yeah, like how do you encourage them to connect in similar ways? Um, and I'm just imagining going off Massima's example, right, of how like validation doesn't always look like words. I can just imagine in a kindergarten classroom how important that like body language piece is if a kid's like, why can't we, share this? Why can't we hug whatever it is that they're struggling with, right? Of like, oh yeah, that would be so much better, right? And just kind of getting on their level with it. That's such a complex, hard question.
Mhm. And I think one of the things I've noticed this summer that I felt really heartened by is that, we're still humans and that need to connect takes over, right? And so I've been watching lots of kids, even little kids who it's been a long time since they've been with other kids and then they get time together. And pretty quickly it, that desire to connect and especially when we can embrace each other in a sort of whole way, right? And I wonder if maybe one of the lessons that we can take from the pandemic is that, there's a time for space, right? And that space can be an okay thing to want as well as being there and in the action. And wouldn't it be lovely if we could use this as a way to learn that, to better support all the different needs, because it can be really complicated. Yeah. Another a question that I was seeing in clinic that I'd love to hear you guys talk about, like amongst our clients, is kids that are feeling, especially teenagers, that are getting really angry about the restrictions, and there have been so many for so long, and especially if they've been in neighborhoods where they've worked, they haven't seen people get sick. They haven't, like, why does this, and that the kids are getting really, you know often distrusting of authority, right? People are trying to take our freedoms for no good reason. I shouldn't believe people, and getting that can be kind of getting rowdy. I don't know. That's a theme I'm seeing. I'm wondering if you guys have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I know when we hear something that might not make much sense, or it's illogical, or it's something that you don't necessarily agree with, there is such a strong pull to correct immediately or give all the facts or problem solve, and absolutely that's so relatable. And the phrase that we often throw around too is the idea of connect before you correct. So this idea of, yeah, you're really angry because you don't maybe see the things that are represented, in the news and in the science, and you don't actually are seeing it. It's hard for you. It feels unjust. And like Helen, you I think talked about sitting with the emotion they're giving you. Going around that underneath that might just be some sadness or grief of lost time or of losses and things like that. But the idea of let's sit with that and look for their emotional truth. For them, it's unjust, and whether or not objectively it is or it isn't, that's a different sort of uh, part of the conversation. But connect before you correct. Um, yeah, even it's much easier to say as a beautiful sentence than it is to do, and it works. It works.
Okay. And I think that brings us to time.
Yeah, thank you everyone that tuned in. I believe we'll wrap it up there. Thanks for spending the evening with us.
Mhm.
Thank you.
And we really appreciate your time, and good luck.